In the middle of the 8th century, the Tang Empire stood at its greatest height. From the eastern shores of the Pacific to the mountain passes of Central Asia, its influence stretched farther than any Chinese dynasty before it. Caravans laden with silk, porcelain, and tea poured westward along the Silk Road. Protectorates and puppet kings bowed before imperial envoys. In the imperial capital of Chang'an, poets called it a golden age. But far to the west, another force had risen, one no Chinese emperor had yet reckoned with. In 750 CE, just a year before our story begins, a revolution shook the heart of the Islamic world. The Abbasid family, claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, overthrew the ruling Umayyads and seized control of the Caliphate. Their armies, Arab, Persian, and Turkic, now poured eastward through Persia and Transoxiana, seeking to expand the new order. Where the Tang Dynasty saw a frontier of tribute and trade, the Abbasids saw a region to be claimed, and somewhere in the high valleys between the Pamir Mountains and the Jaxartes River, the two empires would meet. But it wasn't just empire versus empire. There were other players in the shadows, tribes that knew how to survive between giants. One of them was the Karluks, a powerful confederation of Turkic horsemen. On paper, they served the Tang, but their loyalty had a price, and in the valley of the Talas River, that price would be paid in blood. This was the Battle of Talas. But before we continue, if you enjoy historical videos like this, like and subscribe for more. To understand how this happened, we must take a step backwards to how it all started. His name was Gao Xianji, and though he wore Tang armor and commanded imperial legions, he was no Han Chinese noble. Gao was the son of a Goguryeo noble family born into exile after Tang China crushed Korea's northern kingdom. But he rose fast through the ranks of the Tang military. Bold, ruthless, and brilliant in battle, Gao made a name for himself on the empire's far western frontier, where the Silk Road met the mountains. In 747, Gao led one of the boldest campaigns in Tang history, marching over the snowbound Pamirs and defeating the king of Gilgit in what is now northern Pakistan. By 750, he was China's sword in the west, governor of the Yangtze Protectorate, and commander of all Tang forces in Central Asia. But his ambition outpaced his diplomacy. That same year, a conflict erupted between two small kingdoms near modern Tashkent, Fergana and Chach. Fergana, a longtime Tang ally, claimed its neighbor had violated its borders. Its king sent a desperate plea to Gao Xianji, "Help us crush Chach." Gao did not hesitate. He saw an opportunity not just to punish a rival king, but to remind all of Central Asia who ruled these roads. He marched his army into the region and laid siege to Chach's capital. The king of Chach tried to negotiate. Gao offered him safe passage, a promise of diplomacy, of survival. But once the city opened its gates, Gao betrayed his word. The king was seized, his men disarmed, and his head, severed and bloody, was sent back to Chang'an as a trophy. The Tang army then sacked Chach. The city's elders were slaughtered, its treasures taken, its people scattered. But Gao had made a mistake. He had not killed everyone. The prince of Chach, the king's son, escaped into the night. He fled west, across the deserts and oases, to a new and rising power, the Abbasid Caliphate. And there, in the court of Abu Muslim, the most powerful Abbasid general in the East, the exiled prince told his story of Chinese betrayal, of murder, of blood. Abu Muslim was already wary of Tang expansion. Now, he had a reason to act. And very soon, the Chinese general, who just won a great victory, would face an army larger than any he had ever seen. Word of Gao Xiangzi's massacre spread like fire across the Silk Road. To the Tang, it was just another military success, a ruthless but effective display of dominance. But to the people of Central Asia, it was a warning. The Chinese were not just traders, they were conquerors. In Samarkand, the Prince of Chach found willing ears. Abu Muslim, the Abbasid strongman of Khorasan, was not just a military commander, he was the architect of the revolution that brought the Abbasids to power. Now, he had a perfect cause to justify war, avenge the fallen king of Chach, curb Tang expansion, and rally the Central Asian cities to the Abbasid banner. Abu Muslim ordered his lieutenant Ziyad ibn Salih to gather the eastern armies. Troops were raised in Merv, Balkh, and Herat. Arab, Persian, and Turkic forces, veterans of battles against the Umayyads and Khwarezmians, were assembled under the Abbasid banner. The black flag of the new caliphate now pointed east. Meanwhile, Gao Xiangzi heard the rumors. The Abbasids were moving. There was talk of a coalition forming in Samarkand. A great army was gathering, and the once loyal Karluks had been spotted in negotiations with both sides. Gao acted first. He summoned his allies in Fergana. He conscripted fresh troops from Tang garrisons across the western frontier. Most importantly, he called up about 20,000 Karluk horsemen, mercenaries, and nominal subjects of the Tang Empire. The Karluks pledged their swords. Gao accepted. It was a dangerous gamble. By the spring of 751, Gao had assembled a force estimated around 30,000 men, elite Tang regulars, Fergana infantry, and Karluk cavalry. He marched west, crossing the Sir Daria River, aiming to strike before the Abbasids could fully prepare. But Ziyad ibn Salih was ready. The Abbasid army, estimated over 50,000 strong, was already moving east, reinforced by local tribes, including former allies of Chach and Turkic mountaineers who had no love for the Tang. For 5 days, the two armies shadowed one another along the Talas River, skirmishing lightly, probing for weaknesses. Then, on a hot July morning, both sides formed ranks. Two great empires now face to face. Neither would leave unchanged. At dawn, on the plains of the Talas River, two colossal armies braced for battle. To the east, the Tang formation stood in tight ranks, a wall of discipline forged through years of frontier warfare. General Gao Xiangzi placed his crossbowmen at the front, deadly, long-range troops wielding one of China's most advanced battlefield weapons. Behind them stood Tang heavy infantry in lamellar armor, spears in hand, shields locked. Fergana auxiliaries held the inner flanks. On the far wings, 20,000 Karluk horsemen waited, Gao's mobile force, his insurance against encirclement. To the west, Ziyad ibn Salih organized the Abbasid forces. Veteran archers and javelineers lined the front. Behind them, Arab and Persian spearmen, chain-mailed warriors from Khorasan, and elite Abbasid cavalry in reserve. The black flags of the Abbasids snapped in the wind, surrounded by tribal banners from Transoxiana, Sogdia, and beyond. And between them, a silence, heavy with fate. The first day began with the Chinese advancing. Their crossbows loosed volleys of bolts, cutting through the lighter Abbasid archers. The Arabs fell back. Then, with a signal, the Tang infantry surged forward. The two sides met with a shattering roar. Iron on iron, shield against shield, battle cries, echoing across the plain. The Chinese had the upper hand. Tang troops were better armored, more disciplined. Abbasid lines bent, but did not break. Ziyad responded by unleashing his flanking cavalry, hoping to swing around the Chinese sides, but the Karluks were there to meet them. For now, they held. As the sun set, both armies pulled back, exhausted. The ground was littered with bodies, but neither side had broken. The second day was the same. The Tang attacked, the Abbasids absorbed, the Karluks repelled flankers. Tang crossbows carved deep into Arab lines, but they could not collapse them. Again and again, the pattern repeated. Third day, same thing, and now Gao Xianzhi had a problem. He was running low on reserves. His elite Chinese troops had suffered heavy losses. His Fergana allies were shaken, and the Karluks, though they had performed well, remained quiet, aloof, their leaders rarely seen speaking to Gao directly. Still, he pressed on. By the fourth day, the fighting grew desperate. Both sides had taken staggering casualties, but Gao sensed the tide might turn. One more push, one more charge. He ordered another full advance. That's when the horn sounded, but they didn't come from the Abbasid side. They came from the flanks, from the Karluks. The Chinese never saw it coming. From both flanks, left and right, the Karluk horsemen turned inward. What had been Gao Xianzhi's cavalry support now became his greatest threat. With a thunder of hooves and a blast of curved war horns, they charged directly into the sides of the Tang formation. It was sudden, it was brutal, it was betrayal. Gao's soldiers, locked in fierce melee with Abbasid infantry, were now struck from the flanks by the very riders meant to protect them. Thousands of Karluk lancers and mounted archers, once wearing Tang insignia, now cut down Chinese officers and plowed into disoriented infantry units. At that moment, Ziyad ibn Salih gave the order. The Abbasid army surged forward in a full-scale frontal assault. Arab and Persian foot soldiers crashed into the Tang lines from the front as the Karluks struck from the sides. Tang crossbowmen were overrun before they could reload. Spearmen turned frantically in multiple directions, trying to hold against enemies from three sides. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Gao's formations, so rigid and disciplined for 4 days, were now shattered. Soldiers tried to regroup, but were trampled by horsemen or pinned by Arab cavalry. The Fergana troops, already shaken, panicked and broke, fleeing the battlefield in disorder. Tang officers shouted for order. Gao tried to rally his reserves, but it was too late. The betrayal had pierced the heart of the army. There would be no recovery. In the center, surrounded on all sides, the Tang were dying in place, back to back, hacked down or captured. And still, through the madness, one man carved a path. Li Xie, Gao Xianzhi's second in command, a towering, fierce general from the western provinces, took command of the rear guard. He gathered the last able-bodied troops, estimated around 2,000, and fought tooth and nail to break out of the trap. Arab and Karluk riders tried to surround them again. Li Xie led countercharges, personally cutting down enemies to protect the retreat. His armor was soaked in blood, his horse wounded. But he did not yield. Behind him, the battlefield ran with blood. Of 30,000, fewer than 2,000 Tang soldiers would survive the Battle of Talas. Gao Xianzhi himself escaped with his life, but his reputation and the Tang's Western Empire were in ruins. And the Karluks? They now stood side by side with the victors. The battlefield lay silent. The Talas River ran red. Bodies of Chinese infantry, Fergana auxiliaries, and the fallen Karluks who died before the betrayal lay scattered across the valley. The Abbasid and Karluk forces surveyed the carnage and claimed the spoils. Thousands of Tang soldiers were taken prisoner. Silk banners were seized, imperial armor stripped, tents ransacked. The Abbasids had not only won the battle, they had shattered Tang China's presence in Central Asia. But Gao Xianzhi, wounded in pride and scarred by defeat, had escaped. His surviving officers limped back east, across the Jaxartes, and toward Chinese garrisons in Fergana. There was no army to return to. There was no Western Empire left to defend. Within months, word spread across the oases and mountain towns. Tang China had been broken at Talas. The protectorates once held by Chinese generals, the 4 garrisons of Anxi, the Western Region's command, began to crumble. Cities like Kashgar, Kucha, and Khotan questioned their allegiance. Then, in 755, just 4 years after Talas, disaster struck at home. A Tang general named An Lushan led a massive rebellion. Recalled to defend the capital, Gao Xianzhi's sound defensive strategy was framed as cowardice by court rivals. He was executed not for his past defeat, but for a prudent decision the panicked court no longer had the vision to trust. The Tang no longer had the manpower to hold their western frontier. Chinese garrisons were pulled out of Central Asia. One by one, protectorates were abandoned. Tribes and cities that once pledged loyalty to Chang'an now shifted toward new masters, the Abbasids or the rising Turkic Khanates. What had taken decades of campaigning to build was lost in one betrayal. The Karluks, once Tang vassals, now carved out a new political order in the region, claiming influence over the steppes as allies of the Caliphate. They would play kingmakers in the years to come. And so the Tang, once the dominant power on the Silk Road, became a memory west of the Pamirs. Their Western Empire had ended, not with a last stand, but with a backstab. The Talas River faded into history, a quiet, meandering current in the heart of Central Asia. But what happened on its banks would ripple outward for centuries. For the Abbasid Caliphate, the victory at Talas was more than just military success. It was a signal. With Tang China humiliated and retreating, the Abbasids now held uncontested sway over Transoxiana, the lands between the Oxus and the Jaxartes. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Tashkent became vibrant Islamic centers. No longer contested by Chinese influence, they leaned fully into the world of the Caliphate. Islam began to spread faster through Central Asia, not by the sword, but through merchants, mystics, and scholars, now free of imperial rivals. The Karluks, for their betrayal, were rewarded, granted autonomy and land under Abbasid approval. Eventually, they converted to Islam themselves and helped build the Turkic Islamic civilizations that would dominate the steppes for centuries to come. Meanwhile, in China, the cost of Talas grew heavier each year. The An Lushan rebellion devastated the Tang court. It broke the empire's economy, depopulated entire provinces, and left the dynasty crippled. Though the Tang would survive in name, their age of foreign conquest was over. The Western military colonies were never reestablished. Future Chinese dynasties would look west, but never march there again. And the Silk Road? It remained open, but the Tang no longer controlled its western arteries. Muslim merchants now carried goods across Central Asia. The cultural balance shifted. Where once Buddhist monks and Chinese envoys had passed, now came Arab traders, Persian scientists, and Turkic scholars fluent in the Quran. One world had retreated, another had advanced, and then came paper. Among the thousands of Tang prisoners taken by the Abbasids at Talas, some were not warriors. They were artisans. Among them, according to Arab historians, were Chinese men who knew how to make paper. Before this moment, the Islamic world relied on papyrus, imported at great cost from Egypt, or parchment made from animal skin, expensive, slow to produce, and controlled by older empires. But the Chinese had long held a secret: how to make paper from mulberry bark, rags, and pulp, cheap, efficient, and easy to copy upon. After Talas, the Abbasids brought these Chinese prisoners and their knowledge to Samarkand, where the first paper mill in the Islamic world was established. From Samarkand, paper-making spread to Baghdad, the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. There, under the rule of Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his successors, the new paper technology fueled an explosion of culture. Paper replaced stone and skin in mosques, courts, and marketplaces. Books became more common. Knowledge flowed faster. This was the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age, and Talas, it said, opened the floodgate. Within 2 centuries, paper mills would appear in Damascus, Cairo, and eventually Al-Andalus in Spain. By the 12th century, paper crossed into Europe, first through Muslim Spain, then into Italy and beyond. And when Gutenberg printed his Bible in the 15th century, sparking a revolution of literacy, he did so not on parchment, but on paper. A technology born in Han China crossed a river in Central Asia and found new life in the Abbasid world. All of it because of a battle and a betrayal. By the 10th century, once Buddhist cities like Bukhara and Tashkent were centers of Islamic learning. By the 11th, the Turkic Karakhanids had officially declared Islam as the state religion. A new world had formed, and China was no longer part of it. All because, on one summer morning in 751, a group of Turkic mercenaries switched sides. It began as a clash between 2 great empires, but it ended as something far more profound: the collapse of Chinese power in the West, the rise of Islamic Central Asia, and a betrayal that tipped the scale of history. The Battle of Talas is remembered not because it was the largest or the bloodiest. It is remembered because it was the last time Chinese troops would push that far west, the last time the Silk Road was guarded by Tang banners, the last time the world east of the Pamirs and the world west of the Oxus shared the same imperial frontier. Today, few people remember Talas. Fewer still remember the Karluks. But every time we put pen to paper, every time we map the borders of modern Central Asia, we walk the edge of that betrayal. The empires are gone, the river still flows, and the backstab echoes through the dust of history. This was the Battle of Talas. This was the backstab that ended China's Western Empire. If you enjoyed this historical video, like and subscribe for more historical contents.